What's the first thing you think about when somebody snatches your favorite dessert? Exactly. So what's the first thing you want to do when somebody tells you that you've just been slandered? What's the first thing you want to do when somebody hits you? Automatically, human instincts kick in and we want revenge. But just before revenge, the person who offended you comes to you and says, "Would you forgive me?" Yes, that's exactly what you would say. No. Say, "No, I don't want to forgive you. I want to hit you back. I want to take your dessert. I want to talk bad about you." Our human instinct is not to forgive, but to retaliate. And Peter comes to Jesus and he asks this specific question that Jesus answers. Peter wants to ask Jesus how many times we should forgive somebody. And more than likely, this is not a question that Jesus is being asked of forgiveness pertaining to a particular day. In other words, Peter is not asking Jesus how many times should we forgive somebody in a day. What he is asking is how many times should we forgive an individual at all? In other words, how many times in a lifetime should we forgive somebody who offends us? And he names a number. He says 7 times. You only get 3 shots as a Jew. You get 3 strikes and then you're out. So for Peter to say and to ask Jesus, how many times should we forgive somebody? 7 times is really being generous. So he wasn't taking this thing lightly. He was actually being very, very generous about the number of times that he should forgive somebody in a lifetime. He doubles it and adds 1. It's a perfect number, 7. And Jesus responds to this question by declaring to him that there is no limit to forgiveness. And the way that he says this is, no, not if somebody comes to you in a day, one single day, he says. If somebody comes to you in a single day and asks you for forgiveness, you should forgive him 70 times 7. 490 times. Let's read about this in our text in Matthew. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times?" Jesus answered, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times." And you have to get the day in the other parallel passages, because he does say, if somebody comes to you in a day, then forgive them 70 times 7. Verse 23, "Therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began to settle, as he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. The servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me and I will pay you back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay back the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In anger, his master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother from your heart. The story began with a question initiated by Peter about the subject of forgiveness. Forgiveness is the reason why Jesus came to the cross. The reality of forgiveness is why we have Palm Sunday. It is the one factor in life that you and I cannot escape. The necessity of forgiveness. Not on our part to somebody else, but on God's part to us. Every human being was born with this need. The only person who did not, or only two people who weren't born, and both of them weren't born. So, technically speaking, anybody born was born with this need. Adam and Eve, who were created, were not born or created with this need. They had to get themselves in the position of the need for forgiveness. So all humanity is stuck. If you're born, you are born with this need for forgiveness. You were born with a human nature that is bent away from God. They call that the sinful nature, or the scriptures call that the sinful nature. And you desperately need that. There's nothing you can do to undo that apart from God's intervention. So the reality of forgiveness is embedded in our hearts, and we're constantly trying to get out of it. Get out of this need. But we can never shake it. So instead of just answering Peter's question, yes, Jesus answers the question immediately, but in order to really hit home, in order to actually help us understand what this forgiveness really is, he puts humanity into the answer. He makes us, or draws us into a scenario that helps us evaluate from the outside what's going on so that it will hit home even more. Because if Jesus had just stopped and said, yes, you need to forgive somebody 70 times 7, 490 times, then we would think, oh, that's really hard. I could never do that. And it will be over. But he doesn't do that. He gives us an illustration of how humanity is supposed to interact with each other, and he begins with this parable. A king begins to settle accounts with his servants, and he came across an individual who owed him 10,000 talents. Well, for those of us who don't know what a talent is, and it is very hard to compare the history method of calculating valuables or money, we have to understand what a talent is. Talent is not money, actually. Talent is actually weight. So we're talking about 10,000 talents, and at that time it was approximately, a talent was approximately 3,000 shekels, by weight. So today, if we had to compare, we would have to compare monetarily, and then from money to gold, and then gold to its weight. But one talent weighed about 3,000 shekels, which means that 10,000 talents is 30 million shekels. And the shekel, from that time on, by weight here, by comparison, is about 750,000 pounds of money, coins. So if that is the case, then a talent is approximately 75 pounds, let's say, of gold or silver. Okay? How much is an ounce of gold these days? Anybody have any idea? It's over $1,200, 1 ounce, times 16 ounces, right? And then 75 pounds of that is one talent. So 750,000 pounds times 16 ounces each is a whole lot of money. Okay? You can do the calculations yourselves when you get home. But that's not the point, though. You can sit there and calculate talents and all that stuff. Jesus wasn't saying 10,000 talents in order for us to make a calculation. When we were young, like 4, 5, 6 years old, we talked about $1 million in Korean. Right? $1 million. But to us and to everybody who was talking about this, $1 million was unreachable. In other words, it was so much money, it was replaced, or it is replaced right now, nowadays, with another term that we call gazillion. Okay? So if you want to talk about so much money that is not attainable, you would say, okay, he owes $1 gazillion. Okay? That's what Jesus was saying. Jesus was saying that this individual owed $1 gazillion. In other words, he could never pay that back. So it was an impossible debt even for Bill Gates to pay back, because he doesn't have $1 gazillion. If we took all the money in the world and said, okay, this is how much money you owe Bill Gates, even with, let's say, $80 billion, you still won't be able to pay $1 gazillion, because that's just way too much. It would take him, billions of years to pay it back, even without interest. So Jesus is saying that this individual could not pay back the debt. But he doesn't say how he accrued the debt. See, how would you spend $1 gazillion and borrow $1 gazillion in order to be in the debt? He doesn't say that. Jesus doesn't say, oh, this is how he got into debt. Not like the guy who was arrested, he went to jail because he took his bank's money and he invested it in bad investments of the stock market, and he lost $1 billion. $1 billion he lost. He can't pay that back. But that's how he lost it. But we don't know how this individual got to this point where he owed $1 gazillion and he couldn't pay back the debt. So the illustration here is, what Jesus is saying, and the point that he's making is, we're all indebted so much that we can never pay it back, and you were born that way. See, he wouldn't have been able to borrow that much money from the king. So the story doesn't match. It's not compared to reality. Because if you went to the bank and you borrowed $10,000 or $100,000 and you couldn't pay back in 20 years, nobody else is going to lend you any more money. You won't be able to accrue the debt. But Jesus is declaring here that this guy had so much debt and he was pretty much born with it. In other words, he doesn't compare, he doesn't highlight how he did it, how he got to this point. He just says that's where he is. As humanity, that's where we are. We owe $1 gazillion to God the King. All right. Now he's about to be tortured and he's about to go to jail, but the guy says to the king, "Be patient with me, and I will pay back everything." What kind of? Now see how ridiculous that is? With the backdrop, if he says, "Oh, be patient with me, I'll pay back everything," it's ridiculous. Nobody will be able to say that. Even Bill Gates won't be able to say, "Oh, I owe $1 gazillion. Be patient with me and I'll pay back." You don't have enough lifetimes to pay back. Okay? It was so ridiculous for him to say that. But the response of the king is even more amazing. Because the king says, what the king did, in verse 27, the servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. While the guy was saying, "I'll pay it back," the king was saying, "It is so ridiculous for you. The only way this debt is going to be paid back is if I take pity on you, if I have compassion on you, if I have mercy on you. And that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you mercy by canceling your debt." And he says, "Your debt is now canceled. I let you go." So he cancels the debt, doesn't take the guy's request seriously when he says, "Be patient with me and I'll pay back everything." Just lets him go. Now, first thing about that we need to understand. The reason why humanity does not want to forgive, the reason why you and I don't want to forgive, is because the reality is, if you forgive, you have to absorb the debt. If you borrow even $20 from me, it might be okay for teenagers, very small for the adults. If you borrow $20 from me and you say, "Oh, I'll pay it back, I'll pay it back, pay it back, pay it back," every week you'll tell me you'll pay it back. Pretty soon I'm going to get tired of it. And I'm going to say, "Forget it." Forget it. But if I lent you $20,000 and you can't pay me back, I'm going to keep asking you for it. Because if I say to you, "Forget it. I am out $20,000. If I lent you $100,000, if I lent you $200,000, if I lent you $1 million and you can't pay it back," and I say, "Forget it. I am out that much money. I absorb the debt. If you hit me and you ask me to forgive you, what happens to the debt? I absorb it. And I can't do a thing about it because I forgave you, I can't punch you back." We don't want to forgive because that means we absorb the debt. See, the king said, in effect, here's the truckload of debt that you owe me. I'm giving it to you. Okay, now pay me back. So he gives the truckload back, and he gives it back, right? But if the king says, I forgive you, he is missing out on that truckload. We don't want to forgive because if we forgive, we absorb the debt. You break my window, you break my Ming vase, 5,000 years old, and you broke it. If I forgive you, I'm out. And it's irreplaceable. We have to absorb the debt. So that's why we don't want to do it. Second reason why we don't want to forgive is because I want to badmouth the person who offended me, who cheated me, who hurt me, and I want to tell everybody that this individual did this to me. I want to tell everybody. You know what James did to me? You know what Joyce did to me? And I want to tell everybody. Why? Because I've been hurt. And I want to be justified in my declaration that that individual is nasty, bad, criminal, etc. Same thing that we do with products and companies. You get bad service, what do you want to do? Tell everybody how bad the service is or how bad the company is. But if you forgive, you can't say that. You can't say that. If you forgive, you gotta keep your mouth shut. And we don't want to keep our mouth shut. See, if I talk bad about somebody who hurts me, then I'm justified because that's what happened. There is no redemptive value in that. There is no redemptive value in slandering somebody because that doesn't get you two closer together. It doesn't redeem the relationship. It doesn't reunite you and the offender. So, you don't want to forgive if you want the pleasure of slandering the person everywhere. So you don't declare forgiveness. But we have to. We have to forgive, he says. Okay, there's not a single command in the story. Jesus tells us, yes. He says we ought to forgive 70 times 7. But not the king. The king doesn't do that. King doesn't say, I forgave you, your debt, now go and forgive everybody else their debt. There's no command. So, the admonition from both Jesus and the example is this. We have to forgive. So you forgive for two reasons. One, Jesus says you should forgive. Two, you have seen an example of it. You have experienced an example of it. So, why should we forgive? We should forgive because we're commanded to forgive and because we have seen an example of it. That's a life principle right there. That can preach all over, everywhere, all the time. Because we should do things by both of these methods. One, we've been told that we shouldn't do it. Two, we have seen an example of it. This is based on leadership, and this is based on fellowship. So if you want to be a good leader, you command and you set an example. If you want to be a follower, obey and see the example for encouragement to do it. The servant got out of the king's office, having his debt canceled, and ran into a fellow debtor. And he said, give me what you owe me, 100 denarii. A denarii was 1 1 day's wage at the time. So that's 100 days. So he owed him 100 days worth of salary. Is that debt payable? Can he actually do it? When he said, be patient with me and I will pay back everything, is it possible for him to do it? Absolutely. But the guy did not have patience. He started strangling him and he said, pay back everything. And he said, just be patient with me, I will pay it back. It is possible. He said, no. Had the man thrown in jail because he wasn't given his money back immediately. Even with interest, he was still able to pay back maybe in a year, maybe in a year and a half. I mean, we take 5 years to pay back our car notes. 30 years for our house. So certainly, 100 days worth of wages, which is a third of our salary, whatever that may be, if it's, let's say, $60,000 a year, that's $20,000, which is how much our cars cost when we buy it brand new. So, in 5 years, the thing is paid off, the bank is happy, we're happy, everybody's happy. And this guy said, no, throw you in jail. It is interesting how the word got there, how the word got to the king. Because it says the witnesses, people who saw it, fellow servants, were appalled because they saw both. They saw the forgiveness of the king and they saw the actions of the servant who was forgiven. And they reported it to the king. And the king had him come in. Okay. This is where the fun starts. He said, in verse 31, when the other servants saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed. Distressed upon distressed. And we'll get to that. And went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? He was totally surprised. I mean, flabbergasted. In anger, the master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured. This time he's getting physical punishment. Until he should pay back all he owed. In other words, he's going to be tortured to death. He's not going to rot in jail. He's going to be tortured to death. And he says, this is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother from your heart. We're not going to be judged based on the reality that God has forgiven us. That's way too easy. If we said, hey, look, I'm forgiven. Oh, great, you're going to heaven. That's not the measure. If you claim that you have been forgiven by God, if you claim that the reality of the crucifixion and resurrection applies to you and you celebrate, you're not going to be judged on that. You're not going to be judged on how joyous you are, how grateful you are about this reality in your life. No. No. That would be way too easy because it's just your word against everybody else's, or your word with God's word, and it will be way too easy. The way that you'll be judged on whether you're truly forgiven is